Hello there, this is another episode of Valley to Vietnam, and my guest today is Dale Kelley, who served with the 101st Airborne. My father was with the 82nd Airborne, and there was a lot of rivalry between those two. The patch said AA, which meant the All-American Division, and the 101st guys would say it stands for Almost Airborne. And the slogan of the 101st was the Screaming Eagles, and my father said we called them the Puking Buzzards. So anyway, it was all in fun. They did really respect each other. Well, Dale is an interesting person who lived in Sacramento for a period of time.
Yep.
And you were born where?
Born in Coronado.
Where?
Coronado Island.
Oh, gee, what a lovely spot. I remember Marilyn Monroe was there.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you.
Hotel Del.
Yeah. What was that movie?
Some Like It Hot.
There you go.
Yeah.
And how long did you live in Coronado?
Well, my dad was a career Marine officer, so I and my two sisters were born in Coronado, basically after the war. I was born in 44. They were born in, before me. So when he came back, then we moved to Quantico, I think. We moved every 4 years.
Wow. Now, and how long was he in the Marine Corps?
32 years.
Gosh. Now, when he was coming back, is that when there was that plane crash?
Yeah. He was coming back from the Pacific.
And he was supposed to land at Alameda, I think.
Well, I think they were going to land at Oakland, and it was foggy.
That's where Alameda was.
And they didn't have radar in those days.
Yeah.
So the pilot went around a couple of times trying to see if the fog would clear. It didn't clear, and he misjudged the peak at Mount Tamalpais and crashed into it.
And how many of the people were killed?
Well, everybody on the plane except 3 people.
Oh my gosh.
And my dad was one of the 3.
Was he hospitalized?
These 3 people were taken down the mountain there was no helicopters in those days, so the rescue folks had to climb the mountain and bring him down on litters.
Wow.
And he was in a coma and stayed in a coma for about 6 months.
Gosh.
And then finally woke up.
Was the Marine Corps still paying him?
Oh, sure. Yeah, he was an active duty Marine.
Yeah. Wow. So what happened after that? Did he stay in the Marine Corps?
Oh, yeah, stayed in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
He went in 1932. And he was what's called the old breed.
Yeah.
Which were guys that were in World War II. He was in World War II in Korea.
Yeah.
And he was in Nicaragua in about 1933.
Was he ever in China?
He was in China.
Yeah, the China
He
Marines.
was there for 3 or 4 years.
They were kind of famous.
Yeah, the old guys.
Yeah. So where were some of the other places you lived?
Well, let's see. We lived at Camp Lejeune, which is famous now because the water's bad.
Yeah.
We lived at Cherry Point, North Carolina, all Marine bases.
Right.
Let's see. We lived in Santa Ana because El Toro Marine Base was there. And then we went back to Camp Lejeune for 3 or 4 years, and then finally got back to the West Coast. And my dad's Twilight Cruise, it was called, was at Camp Pendleton.
Okay. And so you grew up in that area. Were you ever in the LA area or?
No.
Okay. So where'd you go to high school?
Went to high school in Oceanside.
Okay.
3 years, graduated, went to 2 years of junior college, and then transferred to Chico State in Northern California.
Right. And then you finished your education in Sacramento?
Well, yeah, I didn't exactly finish.
Oh.
I really went up there to play football and play around, which is what I did.
Yeah.
And after 3 semesters, they invited me not to come back.
Aha. So, but that was Chico.
That was Chico.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you continue school in Sacramento?
Excuse me?
Did you continue school in Sacramento?
No, what I did is I had a student deferment because this was 60, I got there in 64. And in 66 is when I bombed out of school. So I got reclassified in 2 weeks from student to 1A.
Yeah.
So I knew I was going to get drafted, and I was already signed up for the Marine Officer Platoon Leaders class, but you can't be a Marine officer without a degree. So I went around, interviewed basically all the services, and the Army guy I talked to, the recruiter, said you could be an officer if you get through OCS. So I signed up.
So when did you go into the Army?
February 66.
Okay. And then where did you go to basic training?
I went to basic at Fort Ord,
Okay.
right outside Monterey.
And AIT?
AIT, I went down to Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Tanks?
Don't know why.
Yeah,
Yeah, armor.
right. And then you came to Benning.
Yeah, and I went to Benning for infantry OCS. And that was like June or July, something like that, when we started.
August.
August. Okay.
Yeah. So you came out of OCS in February of 67.
Right.
And where'd you go then?
Went back to the Bay Area, got married.
Ah,
And I already had orders to go to Fort Bragg. So drove across country with my new wife, got to Fort Bragg, and got assigned to the Psychological Operations Battalion,
at the
which
JFK,
I hated.
The JFK Center. Yeah.
And I learned how to be a psychological operations officer
And why did you hate it?
because it was all a bunch of bullshit. It was basically, I mean, the concept was good intellectually, but I didn't want to do it. I wanted to be an infantry platoon leader. And I should have gone to special forces because then I would have done exactly what I wanted to do.
Right.
So I was there for like 10 months. I didn't have a job. And so I started volunteering for all Army schools, went to jump school, went to Southeast Asian seminar, went to jungle warfare school in Panama. And then I went to the Pentagon twice asking for orders. And the second time I was up there, my detailer, this major, said, "Quit coming up here. You'll get your orders when you get your orders."
Yeah.
And I just said, "Well, I don't want the war to end before I get over there." And he said, "Get out of my office, you idiot." So I got my orders, and
Yeah.
I went over in January 68,
Oh, okay.
just as TET started.
Yeah. That was the end of January.
Yeah, and it was a mess.
So you were assigned to 101st Airborne.
Well, what happened is I got assigned, I went to what's called the Repo Depot,
Yeah.
and I was there for a week waiting for orders to get assigned to a unit.
And just as antsy as before.
Huh?
And you were just as antsy as before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sitting there thinking, God damn, give me my orders, let me go. So I get assigned to this psychological operations battalion, and I report into them, and there was a lieutenant colonel in charge. So he had my personnel package in front of him, and I reported in, and the first thing I said is, I don't want to do this. I want an infantry platoon. Just send me somewhere where I can do that. And he said, but that's not your MOS. And I said, yeah, my MOS is actually 71542, small unit airborne leader.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to do. And he said, I can't help you. I can't help you with that.
Wow.
So I said, fuck. So then I sat around outside of Benoit Air Base, and a captain came to me and he said, hey, you're jump qualified, aren't you? And I said, see those wings right there, buddy? That's what that means. And he said, you want to go to the 101st? And I said, yeah. And I said, well, what am I going to do up there? And he said, oh, you'll be a PSYOPs advisor to the brigade commander. And I said, I don't want to do that shit. You know, can't you just cut me orders to be a platoon leader? And he said, no, I can't do that. So I go out to the airfield, get on the bird, because their rear headquarters was there at Benoit. 2 brigades of the 101st were up north, and 1 brigade was down south.
Uh-huh.
So I chop her up, go in to meet this full bird colonel that had a CIB with 2 stars.
Wow.
Been in 3 wars. So he's looking at my personnel file, and he said, so you're a psychological expert? And I said, no, no, sir, I'm not an expert. In fact, I don't even want to do it. And he goes, what do you mean you don't want to do it? And I said, I just want an infantry platoon. I don't want to do this shit. I don't want to throw leaflets out of helicopters and talk to people on the, and tell them to give up. Yeah. And he goes, well, that's kind of important. And I said, well, then somebody else can do it. And he said, tell you what I'm going to do. You be our advisor. And he said, do you know anything about this whole? And I said, yeah, shit, I went to a special army school. He says, you do this for 90 days, and if you work out well, I'll give you a platoon. And I said, all right, yeah. You got me. So I did it for like 5 months, and just as I was going to get my infantry platoon, I get wounded and medevac to Japan.
And what was the circumstance of you being wounded?
It was, we were walking along. I was with an infantry platoon, and we were going to set up we were going to go in there and hand out toothbrushes during the day, and then we were going to set up a ambush at night. So we were walking along, and we trip an ambush. I get shot, and a couple of mortars go off. I get fragments across my forehead, and I wore contact lenses, but I had flight glasses on and broke out the glass, but I didn't hit my eyes at all, so I was lucky.
You bet.
So they chopper me down to Long Binh, and I'd been in the field about a week, so my fatigue was about falling off, and I hadn't taken a shower. So they put me on a gurney, and these 2 Army nurses come out, and they start cutting my uniform off. And I said, wait, don't do that. And they said, why? And I said, I don't have any underwear on, because you didn't wear underwear.
Yeah. And
they said, hey, we've seen it before, okay? And I said, all right. So they cut my uniform off, bring me right into the operating room. There's a couple doctors there. And I said, what am I doing here? And the doctor said, well, in about maybe a minute, you're going to be gone, because we're going to put something on top of your face and you're going to be conked out. And I said, okay.
Yeah.
So the next morning I wake up, I'm in bed, there's a Purple Heart pinned to my pillow. And I look around, and I'm in a ward with other officers. And I said, where am I? What happened? And they said, oh, you missed it. The guy came by and put your Purple Heart right on your pillow. And I said, shit. And I said, so what next? And they say, oh, the nurse comes through like once an hour, and she'll give you some pain pills and a shot or something. And I said, how long have you guys been here? And they said, oh, I don't know, a couple of days. So nurse comes by, and I said, so what's the deal? And she said, you got a hole in your leg, you got holes in your head, and you've got some shrapnel in other places. So in about 3 days, you're going to Japan, because we need these beds. And I said, oh, shit. No, and I said, I don't want to go to Japan. I want to stay here and go back to the 101st. And she said, you're not doing that, so forget it. So they load me on a 130. I fly out. They make a couple of stops at some base camps and pick up other guys.
Yeah.
And then we get on, I think, a C-141 fly to Japan.
Huh. And how long were you in Japan?
I was there about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
They did another operation, and I was had a big hole in my leg, but I was on crutches so I could move around and stuff.
Uh-huh.
All I had was those fucking army pajamas. And I'm laying in my bed thinking, this is just bullshit. I mean, come on. So next to me, it was an officer's ward, and next to me is a captain who lost his leg. And, you know, I was kind of grousing about it, and he said, hey, shut up. And I said, well, who the fuck are you? And he goes, well, I'm Captain what's his name, and I lost my leg. And I said, that's not my fault. I'm just grousing about the fact I'm here instead of being back in Vietnam. And he goes, you are a dumb shit, aren't you? And I said, yeah, probably. And he said, just stay here as long as you can, and then you go back to the world. And I said, yeah, okay. So the doctor comes by, and he tells me exactly what's wrong, how long it's going to take to recover. And he said, you can stay here if you want to and recover and then go back to Vietnam. Or you can go home. Which do you want to do?
So
and
you
I
called
said,
your wife.
well, not yet. I didn't call her yet. So he said, well, what do you think you want to do? And I said, he was an Air Force captain. And I said, well, I'll stay here and then go back to Vietnam. And he goes, I don't think you understood what I just told you. You can go home or you can go to Vietnam. And I said, I understood exactly what you said. I don't want to go home. So he said, I'll come back in a couple of days and talk to you again. So that's when I get to go down to the radio room, and they would make a Mars call, and then somebody would call your wife or folks. Uh-huh. So they did that. Well, she didn't know anything had happened to me because they don't get notified.
Right.
So I explained that I was in Japan, I was wounded, there was no big deal, you know, I was fine. And I said, you know, I think I'm going to go back to Vietnam and finish my tour. And she goes, what? And I said, yeah, because, you know, I left my guys there. I feel bad about it. I want to go back. And she said, don't do that. And I said, yeah, well, I've already made my decision. And she goes, you do that, I'll divorce you. And I said, well, that's a little harsh, isn't it? And she goes, that's stupid. You can come home. Why would you go back? And I said, well, it's just how I feel. But I said, I got to be here for a couple of weeks, so I'll talk to you later. And I hung up, and I thought, I just got married a year ago. So I could make 2 calls. So I called my dad, and I told him the whole story, and he goes, yeah, well, I understand why you want to go back. I get that. But he said, you know, here's an idea. Come home. You're still in the Army. You got another 6 or 7 months to go. Totally recover, and then you can go back to Vietnam. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. And of course, when I got home, I thought, I'm not going back. Shit.
Well, you finally wised up, yeah, but...
Yeah, but it was kind of fun being in the hospital with these guys.
Yeah.
We snuck out one night and took the bullet train down to Tokyo and whored around and got drunk. And one of us went to the PX and bought everybody else civilian clothes because all we had is these Army pajamas. So we changed in our clothes, snuck out, went down there, came back the next morning, and we're walking into our officer's ward there. This old nurse comes up, Air Force nurse, and he starts giving us shit. And one of the guys I was with was a captain, and he said, "Look, lady, don't talk to me like that. I outrank you, and I don't want to hear this shit." And she said, "Well, where have you been?" And this guy goes, "It's none of your fucking business where we've been, okay?" And she said, "You can't just walk out of this ward and be gone all night." And the guy said, "Why? What are they going to do to us?" And she said,
Send us.
"I don't know, but you can't do it."
Send us back to Vietnam?
Yeah, what could they do?
Make us be in the Army?
So then we go back to our bunks and change back into our pajamas, and this Air Force colonel comes in, and he's going to read us the riot act. And he's telling us, "You can't just walk out of here like this. You got to check with the nurse, and you guys are recovering, so you can't do that anymore." So this Special Forces captain lost his leg. He said, "Who are you to tell us?" And the guy goes, "Well, I'm a colonel and you're a captain." And the captain says, "But you're in the fucking Air Force, so you don't give us orders." And I thought, you better shut up, buddy. You're going to get in trouble. So I fly back to the States. To Travis, yeah, because that's where I flew out of. I fly back, and I'm going to be in the hospital there for a couple of days. And I'm thinking, well, this is bullshit. So I called my wife, and she was in Chico, and I said, "Drive on down here and pick me up. I'm not staying here." So she said, "Well, don't you have to stay there? Aren't you in the hospital?" And I said, "Yeah, but I can walk around. I'm leaving." And she said, "Well, do you need orders? Do you need to check with anybody?" And I said, "I'm not checking with anybody." So she picked me up. I walked out the door in my Army pajamas, and nobody said anything. So we got a motel, caught up, and I was with her for a couple of days, and then I said, "I guess I better go back to the hospital." Well, she had brought some of my clothes back. So she takes me back to Travis. I walk in the hospital, and I go to the casualty company, and I said, "Hey, you just reporting in here. I was on leave for a while." And they say, "What's your name?" And I said, "First Lieutenant Dale Kelley." And they said, "You're AWOL." And I said, "What are you talking about? I'm not AWOL. I was right here the whole time." And they said, "No, you weren't." And I said, "Okay, I wasn't here the whole time." And I said, "What's the problem?" And they said, "Well, you can't just leave." And I said, "Why? Why? I mean, I just came back from Vietnam and Japan. Why can't I just take a couple days off?" And they finally said, "Shit, just go back to your bunk." So I did, and then they flew me down to Fort Ord, and I got checked in the hospital there, and I was supposed to be there for 3 weeks. Well, the guy in charge of the casualty company was the Special Forces captain who lost an eye over there. And he goes, "You can take 3 weeks off if you want to. Fucking go home. I'll call you when I want you to come back." And I said, "Really? Do I need orders or anything?" And he said, "Nah, just leave." Well, okay, so I called my wife again, "Come down here and pick me up." So I just took 3 weeks leave and
went back to Chico?
We went back to Chico because she was going to school.
Yeah.
And then I came back and checked in with him, and he said, "You got 1 more week, and then they're going to discharge you." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "How about being like my aide or something, and run around and, do admin stuff and interview people if I need that?" And I said, "Yeah, I could do that." So he had me doing line of duty investigations. And my very first one was a guy who was on guard duty in Vietnam, and to get out of Vietnam, he shot his big toe off. He was in a bunker with another guy, and he was telling the guy, "Man, I hate this shit. I just want to go home." And the guy said, "Well, don't we all?" And the guy said, "You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to shoot myself in the foot." And the other guy said, "Don't do that." That's a bad idea. So the guy shoots himself in the foot, but it's dark. He was going to shoot his toe off, but he shot right in the middle of his foot.
Oh.
And so they amputated his foot.
Oh, my God.
So I was doing a line of duty investigation. They wanted to court-martial this poor dumb shit for destroying government property. And so I said, well, what happened over there? Tell me what happened. So he gives me this bullshit story. And I said, you know, specialist, I don't think that's what happened. Because I've already interviewed somebody else. I hadn't, but I just told him that.
Yeah.
And I said, I think you intentionally shot yourself because you wanted to get out of Vietnam. And he said, well, yeah, okay, I did. And I said, do you know the Army wants to court-martial you now? And he said, why? And I said, well, number one, you're a dumb shit. And number two, you shot yourself and now you're missing a foot. I mean, that wasn't real bright. And he said, yeah, but at least I'm not over there. And I said, yeah, but you're going to be limping the rest of your life. And he goes, well, they decided not to court-martial him.
Huh.
And then I got assigned to a basic training company for the last 6 months. Well, that was my brilliant Army career.
Yeah. Okay. But I'm sure your wife and folks were happy you were still alive.
Yeah, and well, see, my dad was really pissed off at me that I didn't go in the Marine Corps.
You would have been dead.
I would have been dead, and he visited Fort Ord when we got back, and he and I were sitting outside drinking beer, and he said, you know, I was really disappointed you weren't a Marine officer, but understand you had to make your own decision. And you did, and you know, you're an officer now, you've done a great job, you've been in combat, good. And I said, Dad, if I'd have gone in the Marine Corps, you wouldn't be sitting here talking to me, I'd be dead. And he said, yeah, I think you're probably right.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, my sergeant major in Special Forces was assigned as the B-52 guy for a Marine battalion. And he said, you know, this Marine battalion had charged up this big hill the day before and just taken horrendous casualties. And the colonel was talking to them and said, we're going to go up that hill again. And they were going, hoorah. He said, that never happened in the Army. So.
Well, their training and their whole philosophy was completely different.
True.
Their philosophy was throw people at it, and the Army's philosophy was throw airstrikes and artillery at it first.
Right.
Which made a lot of sense.
So now you're back in the States and you've got to earn a living. So what were you doing?
Well, when I got out of the Army, I did not have a degree because I had basically screwed around. So I went back to Chico, finished my master's degree, and then didn't know what to do with myself, so I got a master's degree. Well, I got a BA in political science and a master's in public administration. And then I found out that I wasn't qualified to do much of anything except sell life insurance or pharmaceuticals. And I said, well, this is kind of bullshit. But I had done an internship at the Reading Police Department.
Wow.
As part of my graduate program. And I thought, you know, this seems interesting. I think I'll do this. And the police chief was a guy that had a doctorate degree and had been a cop at Berkeley for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
And so part of my internship was I rode with his officers, I worked in investigations as an intern, worked in the radio room, so I could see the whole thing, how it worked. And I said, you know, I'm kind of interested in this. And he said, don't be a cop. He said, a guy like you, why don't you go in the FBI? And I said, never thought about it, but it's an idea. So I did ultimately apply for it. And then I came to Sacramento to look for a job, and voila, I ran into you.
Yeah. And he was, Dale was a student intern at our agency, Office of Criminal Justice Planning, And I said, you know, you're married, your wife's pregnant. I think you can do better than that. So
Yeah.
I went and talked to the former sheriff of Shasta County, Wayne Cranick, and he ran the law enforcement division of OES. And he says, well, Bob, you know, I usually hire former police officers. I said, look, this guy's going to be better than any police officer. And so just give him an interview. And he hired you.
He did. That worked out good.
Yeah.
That was good experience.
Yep.
Real good experience.
So then, eventually, after going for another state agency,
Yeah.
and that agency was,
Well, along the way, when I was getting my graduate degree, I got assigned to a reserve unit, and I thought, well, this is impossible. I just got back from Vietnam. Why are they doing this? Well, I couldn't get out of it.
yeah,
So I was assigned to a reserve unit for 2 years, 2 more years, and at first I was really pissed off about it. And I thought, God, this is not fair. Well, I went out there for the first meeting, and I realized I could do this like once a month, and in the summertime for 2 weeks I would go to Fort Ord, and it turned out to be a basic training unit, the reserve unit I got. Well, shit, I had just come from a basic training unit that I ran.
yeah,
And I thought, well, it's extra pay. I could use the money because I was going to school on the GI Bill. So I did that for 2 years. And that was a complete waste of time, money, and everything else because they weren't ready for anything.
yeah,
But, you know. So, yeah, then I went to another state agency, post, Peace Officer Standards and Training, and I was there for 3 years and then went in the Bureau.
right. And you were in the Bureau 8 years?
6 years,
6 years.
yeah.
And your wife talked you into quitting because she didn't want to move.
Well, she didn't, we were in Seattle first office.
Yeah.
Which was like paradise.
Right.
Used to take the ferry over, walk up 1 block, and I'm in the federal building.
From Bainbridge Island.
From Bainbridge Island.
Yeah.
And then 2.5 years in Seattle, I get my orders for Chicago. Well, I had told her all along, this is my new career, this is what we're gonna do. You know, they're gonna move us, we gotta go there. So we're in Chicago for 2 years, and she just hated it. And you know, it wasn't the greatest place, it was cold, really
Yeah.
cold. I loved the work, and I liked the people I worked with. So I come home one time, and maybe at 8 o'clock at night, all the furniture's gone, she's gone, the kids are gone.
Whoa.
And I'm thinking, oh shit. So I called her mother, and I said, what's going on? And she said, you know, you're really mistreating my daughter and your own family. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you drug them all the way out to Chicago and la, la, la. And I said, hey, is Roberta there? You know, your daughter, can I talk to her? So she comes on the phone, and I said, what do you think you're doing? And she said, I'm not coming back, and the kids are not coming back. And I said, well, wait a second here. Don't I have a little say in this thing? And she said, no, you don't, because I've been telling you for the last year I don't want to be here. And I said, but this is my job. What am I supposed to do? And she said, quit. And I said, no, I don't think so. Well, I thought about it, and then I thought, you know, I don't want to lose my family. And I love the kids, so I'll get out of the Bureau and I'll get another job.
So you went to work for one of the big...
Went to work for the Boeing company.
Yeah.
in
And you
security.
hated it.
Hmm?
And you hated it.
Actually, I liked it, but it was boring.
Yeah.
And actually anything after the Bureau, and I was in Seattle and Chicago, and I was on the SWAT teams, loved it. So anything after that, it was gonna be boring. And I should have accepted that, but it was just kind of like, oh man, this is bullshit, I don't like this.
You were Action Jackson.
Well,
And just
it was a good operation. You know, I liked the people, they had great people.
So then you got into the private investigation business.
Yeah, I bailed out of the Boeing company after 3.5 years. The guy that hired me was an ex-FBI, and he was the director of security. So one day I walked in his office and I said, "John, can I tell you what my plans are?" And he said, "I know what your plans are. You're going to take my job in a couple of years." And I said, "Well, no, I'm not. I'm going to quit." And he goes, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, I know, it probably sounds kind of stupid, but I'm bored here. It just is, doesn't do a thing for me." And he said, "Okay, I hate to see you do it, but do what you got to do." So I did.
So weren't you, after that, going to accept a job with Miami Vice?
Well, I got a divorce, and I knew that was coming.
Yeah.
So I figured, shit, I can't. First of all, I didn't like Seattle weather. I mean, it was a beautiful place, but I hated the freaking weather. It was cold, it was rainy, it was shitty. So I said, I got to get out of here. Well, I talked to an ex-agent who was working for, I think it was Miami Metro Police Department. And he said, "Man, they'd love to have you." And I said, I don't want to be a cop. And he said, "No, this is not, you could go into their intelligence section, it's not the same thing." So I said, "Okay, well." So he said, "Why don't you come on down here and I'll get you all squared away with the paperwork and everything." I said, "Oh, okay." So I told the two boys who were like 10 and 12, I got to leave. And I told my wife, "Well, this is what I'm going to do." And of course she said, "Oh, that's right, run away." Yeah, don't accept responsibility, just run away. And I said,
Let's see, Miami's probably about as far away from Seattle as possible and still be in the States.
so I was going to drive.
Yeah.
So I get down to my mom's house, who's living with my sister in Long Beach. And I'm going to stay there for a couple of days, and I'm going to continue to drive. So my mom, I'm sitting there having morning coffee with her, and she says, "What are you doing?" So I tell her, and she said, "And you're going to be how far away from those two boys?" And she said, "Do you want your ex-wife to raise those boys?" And I said, "Well, I'm kind of thinking when I get to Miami and get settled that they'll move down there with me." And she said, "This is a stupid idea, and you shouldn't do it." And I said, well, I got to have a job. What am I supposed to do? And she said, "Get a job around here." And I said, I don't know. I have to think about it. So I thought about it for a couple of days, and I thought, she's right.
Yeah. It's an easy flight from LA to Seattle.
Yeah. So stayed there, got into the PI business, hooked up with a bunch of ex-agents, and been doing that pretty much ever since.
Yeah. Well, Dale, thank you for telling your story.
You're welcome.
You set a new record as far as the number of swear words in an interview.
Well, it was the Army.
Yeah. He was like a choir boy before he went in the Army.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate
Thank you. Appreciate it.